Synth TV. Hey everybody, Synth TV. And I'm excited to have with me today Jack Curtis Dubowsky, composer, performer, researcher, member of various academies of varying sorts. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here, Amanda.
Awesome. Yeah, we've known each other for a while, haven't we?
Decades. We've known each other for decades, back when I lived in San
Goodness.
Francisco.
Yeah, my goodness, time just flies, doesn't it? Especially at the moment. Yeah. Well, speaking of time, you have a new album out just for this season, right?
Yes, I have a new album out. My new album is Halloween Horror.
All right. Ooh, we're going to put a copy of the cover right up here for everybody to see.
Oh, great.
We've been really enjoying this album here the last few days.
Oh, good.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
So, I mean, I'm down here in the Los Angeles area, and one of the things I do is work as a music editor, which is how I kind of do some showbiz work. And I have various music supervisors who would ask me for tracks. And so I had kind of like this bunch of spec tracks that were kind of just like finished and lying around. And I just thought I should do something with this stuff because it wasn't placed. And the other thing was that I'm a huge fan of the guitarist Kevin Dunn, who was a big part of the Athens, Georgia scene and DB Records. And I connected with him on Facebook, and I I was a huge fan of Kevin Dunn, and I asked him if he would do some tracks for me during the pandemic, the nowhere times or whatever we're calling it. And much to my surprise, Kevin McVoy Dunn said he would record some guitar tracks for me. And I was like, oh boy. So I sent him a bunch of these tracks that were kind of like very skeletal or just in a very simple structure that hadn't been placed. And he very kindly and generously gave me a whole bunch of guitar tracks, cut a whole bunch of tracks at home, and they're amazing. And that kind of just pushed it up over the top because I had all this great stuff and I thought I should just put this out.
Great. Yeah, it's amazing how much during the pandemic we've been able to connect with, musicians in other places, have, lay down tracks for one another, things like that. That's how my last album was done, with G. Calvin West and Jamaluddin Takuma connecting. And I just got this great rhythm section that I wouldn't have been able to put together otherwise.
Yeah, it's a really big surprise. I mean, if you ask people to do stuff, as I'm sure you've found out during the pandemic, you can ask people to do stuff and they might not reply or they might just say no, but sometimes like someone says yes, and then you end up working with someone who you're a big fan of that you never thought you would work with. And it's really incredible. Just to plug Kevin Dunn a little bit here, he's been doing stuff for decades. One of his claims to fame is he produced the original 7-inch single of Rock Lobster on DB Records before they were re-recorded by Warner Brothers. And he has a 1981 LP called Kevin Dunn and the Regiment of Women, which is just like a synth pop classic. It's one of these sort of unknown gems but he's been recording and making music for decades. And one of the things I like about working with Kevin is that his guitar sound is so distinctive. He's one of these guitarists, you hear it and you're like, that's Kevin Dunn. And that's what I was really excited about when he sent me these tracks. It's like, oh, wow, this sounds just like Kevin Dunn. So that was like part of it. Part of the excitement for me working with Kevin was that he has such a unique sound.
Totally. And we will definitely put a link to some of Kevin Dunn's work so people can find out more about it. Yeah, so as you're saying, these were specs and things like that were done. It feels like it's an interesting example segue, sort of. Is that a term, example segue? Into some of the topics of your recent book as well, about easy listening and film scoring, which one of the really interesting things I got out of it was this is the life of a working musician in the middle of the century, especially a working musician in Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, it was a kind of really, for me, an interesting topic. It was like a very kind of square topic that a lot of people at the time that I pitched the book were not really interested in, which I thought was really interesting because one of the things that I had noticed was that a lot of the famous film scoring people that everyone is excited about had done work in easy listening in the mid-century. And the other interesting connection, which is why I was really interested in talking to you on CatSynth TV, was that I learned that there was this huge connection between easy listening, popular music, and synthesizers. That easy listening records were among the first, if not the first, to adopt synthesizers in a commercial context. And this was really, really revelatory to me because everyone kinds of thinks of, oh, synthesizers, it's like Sheffield, it's like the Human League, it's like Kraftwerk and kosmische music. And it's like, well, actually, synthesizers were adopted a lot earlier. And that was very interesting. And of course, now everyone knows about, for example, Raymond Scott, who was using homemade electronic instruments in the 1950s. And we can go back even earlier to a lot of people who were making electronic instruments in the 1930s and stuff, especially using heterodyning of oscillators controlled by capacitance, like the Onde Martineau and the theremin and stuff like that. So it has this long history, and it was just very strange to realize that a lot of this synthesizer music and synthesizers themselves had these connections to easy listening. For example, so this is Raymond Scott, who was making electronic music in the 1950s. And this was not academic experimental music. This was music for advertising. And then he made records for babies. And the distance between a record for a baby and easy listening is like this much,
I know.
if that. It's
Yeah.
basically easy listening record. Um, and then, of course, we have everyone's favorite. But this cover, I'm showing off here because this is the original cover that
Oh dear.
Columbia pulled because Bach did not look happy enough.
Oh dear.
So this is the very first pressing of this record, which is actually quite scarce now because Bach looks unhappy. Um, so this was recorded, this was released in October of 1968, talking about Halloween in October. This comes out in October of 68. Everyone knows this record. It goes to the top of the charts, the classical charts. And what struck me was that this is actually kind of an easy listening record. It is a very kind of static background. You put it on and you listen to it and you enjoy it. And everything is a kind of constant energy and a constant volume. And this sparks a rash of other records that kind of prove that this is easy listening genre. So there's like a whole rash of these that come out. Remember that came out October 1968. So within months, not even years, within months, this comes out. The Switched on Bacharach album.
That's brilliant.
No, they're switched on. Did I show you Switched on Buck? You're going to love this. Have you seen this one?
I have not seen that one.
Switched on Buck. You'll love it. Electronic versions of Buck Owens country music. And they don't stop. They don't stop. They just keep coming along. Same name, Switched on 1974, Switched on Beatles.
Of course. Yeah.
Of course, inevitable, inevitable. Yeah, now this I'm really proud of because this is really scarce without the sticker that a lot of shops and the label put over the junk, because it's really rare to find this without the sticker.
Beautiful.
All right, I'm sorry. I just get so excited if anyone's interested in this stuff.
Totally. We're interested. I think people watching this are interested. So we should probably step back a moment and just say what the book is, title, and its thesis, such as it is.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. So, my new book is Easy Listening and Film Scoring, 1948 to 1978, and it's on Routledge. And have your university library order it because it's kind of expensive. But it's supposed to be coming out in paperback at some point, 18 months after publication. So it will come out in paperback. And it's, of course, it's an ebook, but you can't hold an ebook. What's fun about that?
Yeah, well, we'll put a link to that, to the hardcover and ebook, as well as the hopefully future paperback there. Um, yeah. So, coming back to how the uh, how the first of the switched ons, and yeah, it's interesting to notice the bandwagon effect. We see that all over the place. Of course, I think about the rash of space opera that came out right after the original Star Wars, for example. That, hey, we got to have a science fiction picture kind of thing going on. So we see that here too. But I want to go back for a moment to what you were saying, that it first was topping in the classical charts and then easy listening. And one of the things that I was fascinated reading, and I guess I kind of knew it beforehand, but kind of it was interesting to see it just written out there, was sort of the way that easy listening, even with its use of classical orchestration, is in some ways in opposition to what we think of as classical music, a lot of cases. The sort of the more unpredictable, bombastic, the intense and maybe not so easy listening qualities of classical music that makes us enjoy that versus the way we enjoy easy listening. And now that some of the things that are in the earlier canon have more in common with the switched on things, with the 1960s things that are marketed as easy listening.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. There's this definite connection between the so-called classical world and easy listening, like you point out. There's this sort of interesting phenomenon that happened where, and this is really relevant today with the whole glut of PhDs and everything, where you had conservatories churning out all these people, and there weren't really enough opportunities to actually write concert music. So a lot of very talented musicians, to get work, went into doing library music or easy listening or working for television or film, which was seen as Lee Holdridge says in the book, was seen as prostituting yourself by writing for film and television and going to Hollywood and becoming one of those people. Um, so it's a really interesting phenomenon that a lot of the people that were involved in easy listening were really talented musicians and used it to further their career. And one of the things that I found interesting was that they also sort of tried to align this later in their career. So, for example, you have Andre Previn, who basically uses easy listening to establish his career, gets connected with the London Symphony Orchestra, gets connected with television, and builds this career as a classical conductor and composer. And then when he dies, rest in peace and all that, none of the obituaries mention that his career was built on easy listening. And he has all these easy listening records and performances as an easy listening artist and pianist and conductor and arranger. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a thing. I mean, to me, it's really interesting that easy listening has these connections with electronic music and classical music and serious art music that people tend to overlook or forget.
I think we've kind of seen, in recent decades, film music enter that more and more. That people kind of canonized a lot of film music. And obviously, there's a lot of wonderful film music in various sorts, some of the classical type things that we talk about. But then also, I love all the sort of Lalo Schifrin 70s film music. And these have sort of made it into sort of canon and study in a way that I think the things that get labeled easy listening don't. Even if we see a lot of musical similarities in how they're constructed, how they're composed, how how they're used. Library music too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was one of the things that spurred this book on as a book project, is that there's all these composers of film music that academia became very interested in, and academia was interested in their film music, but not in their easy listening music. And we're kind of just like, no, 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 don't talk about that. Don't talk about that. And one example is that I mentioned is Andre Previn. Another one is Henry Mancini, who's discussed extensively in the book, who wrote tons of easy listening records. And another one that I'm a particular fan of that I discuss extensively in the book is Michel Legrand, who, interestingly enough, never kind of denied his work in easy listening. And he continued to give credit to this album, I Love Paris, for establishing his career. And he continued to make easy listening records throughout his career, even after he'd won Academy Awards and prizes and all that. This is, again, I think this is 1974, Michel Legrand. This is a 2-album box set. It's all arrangements. It's all easy listening arrangements of songs that were famous throughout the 20th century. And this also includes a lot of synthesizer on it. And he even discusses the synthesizer on this record. There's a quote about this in my book. I forget exactly what he says. But it's interesting that Michel Legrand keeps making records like this. No one's forcing him to make records like this. He keeps doing it. He loves arranging, and he loves kind of like classic songs, which are the basic repertoire for easy listening. And so he just goes and does it and doesn't worry about what people think.
Totally. More power to him there. So, I don't know if we can delve into a little bit of his, because I was reading a little bit about it, his use of electronics, his use of synthesizers.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because at a certain point, everyone kind of adopts them. It becomes a very popular thing to use. And I think it's interesting, I think, for Cat Synth TV to look at this and consider this, because I mean, you do a lot of stuff that's incredible with like modulars and the hardware, and it's interesting to think about, who was doing it themselves and who brought in a guy to do it for them. Like the famous example is George Harrison brings in Krauss of Beaver and Krauss and doesn't give him credit, and there's the whole that thing. And, so there's this interesting history going on of everyone wants, okay, it's like after Switched on Bach, between Switched on Bach and the 1970s, everyone wants a synthesizer on their record. And how do they do it? Do they get someone to do it for them? Do they do it themselves? I mean, it's interesting.
Instruments like the one we have in the back here, the Mini Moog, or the sort of keyboard-oriented tonal synthesizers affected the use in these areas versus the earlier style of repurposed electronics, early modular DIY, and how we see things get used.
That's a great question. I have to show you another record. This is Ramsey Lewis's Mother Nature's Son, which is an amazing, easy listening version by a jazz pianist with an orchestra and choir of the Beatles' White Album.
Oh, wow.
And this has electronic music synthesizer, mostly used as interludes between pieces by Charles Stepney, who was a very famous African-American musician, arranger, producer. And he does these crazy electronic interludes between the pieces. And this is kind of what's being done in late 1968, early 1969. So this is recorded in, I believe, December 1968. So that's like 2 months after Switched on Bach. And we also have the same kind of thing in, are you ready for this? You may know the famous New York arranger, Don Sebesky. And this is Don Sebesky's Distant Galaxy. You got to hear this record if you haven't heard this record. And this also has this kind of thing with these electronic music interludes that are just weird, and they're not necessarily tonal, and they're they're kind of Buchla-like, and they're not worrying about is it in tune or not. It just sounds weird. Great, let's do it. And I think that's really cool. And one of the things that Wendy Carlos does with Switched on Bach is that it's so in tune and so tonal, is that it kind of pushes this weirdness a little bit to the side, which is fine because people tend to go for the kind of stuff that's easy to digest. And the way the weird stuff creeps in, as you can imagine, is between tracks and interludes and transitions. If you're just going for the weird sounds, you can do it yourself a little bit. I think, I imagine. It was when you had to make the sounds be perfect that you had to, in 1968, be a real expert like Wendy Carlos, because otherwise the machines could be very uncooperative. As you know, with the modular system, you had to scale the keyboard. You had to make sure that it was the right intonation and pitch system that you wanted to use. So there was a lot of work involved in getting very basic sounds that now you can just, oh, there's a preset. I want a flute sound. Boom. And in 1968, that was not so easy.
Thinking about this, I mean, is that whether it's in the electronic domain or in, just the use of session players, but is there a sense that there needs to be perfection in the sort of, especially the ones that are really the sort of central things in mid-century easy listening? There's this idea that, things have to be perfect. It has to be just sort of, it has to be crafted to fit into the landscape.
Yes, definitely. That was one of the big movements in easy listening, this notion of beautiful music in beautiful recordings. And this is why we saw things like Command Records put out really great pressings and beautiful gatefold covers with the shiny cover, and it opens and it has all the recording details. And a lot of these easy listening records were even mastered to 35 millimeter film for the better sound. And a lot of these easy listening records, you'd open the gatefold and they have information about how they were recorded and what tape machine was used. So it was very interesting that easy listening became part of this high fidelity fetish that helped sell equipment and sell record players and sell the record changer. Getting back to this idea of beautiful music and beautiful recordings with expensive packaging that you will treasure forever is things like this. These box sets that, I mean, you find these things in thrift shops now for like, $5, but they're huge, they're humongous. And the packaging is, I mean, it's really durable. They have these like complicated things that open up, and then they have all the information about all this stuff. It was like they were selling you a thing, and they were trying to make people into collectors of records and product and stuff.
Yeah, it's so interesting to contrast that with now. I mean, I'm still, a fan of the musical recording as object. I mean, I make and sell CDs, we purchase those, but it just seems like that idea of the record collection, of the thing that you hold, that you have, is starting to fade, or at least fading in this particular moment.
I mean, that is a brilliant digression, the recorded object as objet art or as collectible, because in the mid-century, that was kind of like how record labels made money. Let's sell them some big, expensive, heavy thing that they're going to treasure, and you can play. And look, there's like, 6 albums in here. You put them on your record changer, and you can have music nonstop for hours on end. So yeah, I mean, it is really interesting. And then to look at things today where you're like, oh, buy my CD, it's custom, it's hand signed. So yeah, it's interesting how things have changed because of changes in technology and streaming and delivery systems and fan communities and things like that.
Okay, so I would be totally remiss if I didn't bring up Creed Taylor.
Oh, wow. Yeah, Creed Taylor. Oh my gosh. I'm just like, okay, I'm a fan. I'm just going to say this. Everyone in the jazz world hates on Creed Taylor. And I mean, I just think he's brilliant. So Creed Taylor is this white guy who's like affiliated with Impulse Records, and he later has his own label, CTI, and he produces, all these people, Wes Montgomery, Quincy Jones. I mean, Creed Taylor could take you from an obscure jazz artist and make you sell millions of records to white people. And it was like he was a brilliant arranger, a brilliant producer, a brilliant businessman, and as a result, he's a really kind of controversial figure. He was very genius in spotting people who were talented and could do stuff that would appeal to a broader audience. And there's this anecdote in my book where he's talking about Wes Montgomery, and he's saying that you're never going to sell records like these Riverside records where there's interminable solos. It just goes on and on. And so Creed Taylor produces Wes Montgomery, and he has hits, and he makes the recordings very concise and very clean and with orchestras and beautiful arrangements. And one of the things you may notice about the Creed Taylor records is that if you look in the gatefold, they will mention all the session players that played on these records. Like any respectable jazz record, they say who played on it. You look at the names, and they are all like first pick, A-list players. They are the best jazz players. So there's this really weird irony of looking down on Creed Taylor, who's using the best players and using great studios and great recording engineers and making really slick stuff. And it was this slickness that bothered a lot of people in the jazz community because they wanted to make Riverside kind of records with the solos that go on and on and on, and this kind of raw, free sound. It's like, yeah, we set it up in the recording studio, we played it, and we recorded the whole album in like 3 hours. No, Creed Taylor was like, we're gonna make this something. And he did, and he sold millions of records. So he's an interesting figure. And what he did was he made people like Wes Montgomery into easy listening stars. And a lot of the people in the jazz community resented him for that, which, I mean, you get, everyone gets it. But it's interesting to see the impact he had on people like Quincy Jones. So Quincy Jones is a young trumpeter, I think. He's a young player, right? Trumpet, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Quincy Jones starts out as a young jazz musician. He becomes an arranger. He becomes very in demand. And, when he starts working with Creed Taylor, this kind of lays the future that you can see for when he starts making these albums with people like Michael Jackson that sell hundreds of millions of copies. So it's like, it's the music business. There's music and there's business. And Creed Taylor becomes very influential, I would say, on the careers of people like Quincy Jones and others who would like to make money and sell a lot of records. And that's kind of what easy listening is about. It's about popular appeal. It's about selling records to a lot of people. And it's funny because in the book I talk, there's some other Wes Montgomery re-release, and in the liner notes they're slagging the Verve records, they're slagging the CTI stuff, and they're saying, wasn't those Riverside records great? And it's like, that's just the opposite of Creed Taylor. What Creed Taylor was saying. Creed Taylor was saying those Riverside records are interminable jazz solos, and we could record a record that's really great and sell a lot more. And the whole reason why you have these reissues now is because of the Verve and CTI stuff.
Right, right. Yeah, kind of brings it full circle. Kind of bringing it back to electronics and the notion of the sort of the the dirty sort of punk aesthetic of a lot of electronic music. Even the early academic studios kind of had that vibe to it, and then crossing that over with some of the more slick things that we talked about earlier, the very in tune, um, like people who do both.
Yeah, it's really interesting you mention that because, for example, Wendy Carlos, as I'm sure you know, was a student of Vladimir Ussachevsky, and she was at the Columbia Princeton lab. And do you know about her first release on Turnaround? It's either Turnabout or Turnaround.
Yeah,
You
I
know
think
about this?
yes, I think I've heard
All
about this.
right, all right. I have a copy. But anyway,
Yeah.
so I mean, people are coming out of this thing, and I mean, I don't even know what to say, but it's great that you brought this up because there's sort of these waves that are going along of this academic adoption of synthesizers and electronic music that's happening in the early 60s. At the same time, Raymond Scott is just building instruments at home. And it's sort of like what's interesting about easy listening is that it can absorb this stuff and find a way to make it real pretty and beautiful. So it's kind of really interesting.
Yeah, so what's coming up next? With the book, with the recording. I know you were on tour this summer.
Yeah, the tour thing was great. It was like I was not expecting to do that, and the stars aligned, and we did a little tour for um Bolsa Chica Com. Thank you. We did a little tour for Bolsa Chica Com, and yeah, I don't even know what's coming up. We're doing two shows. I have this group, the Jack Curtis Dubowsky Ensemble, and we do um, live score shows for silent film, and it's the 100-year anniversary of Nosferatu, and we're doing two shows. We're doing Halloween night at the Art Theater in Long Beach, and we're doing October 28th at the beautiful historic $1 Million Theater in downtown Los Angeles, one of Los Angeles's original movie palaces. Um, I am also working on my third book under contract to Routledge, which is called Composing for Silent Film. And this will be my first film, excuse me, this will be my first music composition textbook. And it's specialized for making new scores for silent film. So I'm excited about that.
Where can people find out more about the music, the upcoming shows, writing?
JackCurtisDubowsky.com, and the ensemble is at destylemusic.com/JCDE.
Okay, yeah,
And
we'll put links to that at the end of the video and in the description below.
oh yeah,
Yeah, so
all the Twitters and all the Instagrams.
we will do all of that, all the things. Yeah, so well, it's been really great having you on the show today. Thanks for being with us virtually in the studio at Cat Synth HQ and for sharing your collection there with us as well.
Thank you, Amanda. It's so great talking to you. It's so exciting.
To find out more about the work of Jack Curtis Dubowsky, please visit his website and check out the description below this video. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to Cat Synth TV.
You are watching Cat Synth TV.